Connor McDavid is hesitating before signing an extension with the Edmonton Oilers. We'll talk about the impact that has on their offseason. Plus, the Utah Mammoth and the Chicago Blackhawks may hold the key to the first round of the NHL Draft. We'll have all that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers and Locked On NHL. And, the offseason is less than a week old, and already lots of controversy surrounding the Edmonton Oilers. And maybe the biggest piece of news, Connor McDavid indicating he's in no rush to sign a new deal with the Oilers. What does this mean? How much of this is posturing, and what impact does it have on Edmonton's plans this offseason?
So the first thing I would point to is Draisaitl signed his extension, which will kick in this upcoming season in September of last year. I think very clearly the Oilers want to get this done. There's no indication McDavid is dissatisfied with his tenure in Edmonton. So my assumption is the Oilers are going to maneuver over the next week and a half. They have at least one or two moves to make as far as creating more cap space. They have several players, including Evander Kane, Victor Arvidsson, who are candidates for change of scenery, salary dump trades to create more space. McDavid is under contract for next year. I personally feel they are going to get their ducks in a row to get an understanding of what their books are going to look like next summer for whatever that McDavid extension is going to be. As far as the number itself, you do the basic math, you grab your calculator, you put in whatever the salary cap max is, you times that by 0.2, the 20% max of players allowed, and you offer that. And then the other question, and I know this has been a bit of conjecture over the last week or two in regards to Mitch Marner, it's the term, because there's a world where, because the cap is going to start increasing more than just incrementally the next handful of seasons, you might stand to make a lot more money if you do 3 or 4 year deals versus 7 or 8. Matthews is the only guy of the superstar cohort this time around who did that. He did the 4x13, and he's going to have an opportunity to cash out. And it really depends. If Connor wants to keep doing 3-4 year deals, he's 28. You do 28, 31, 35, you can really max out your earning potential if you want to keep adjusting for the rate of inflation and the increasing salary cap. So really, I think more than anything, he just wants to see what their plan is, because they definitely need to improve some things. They need to open up some cap space to make more moves. And once he has an idea of where things are going, I think it's simply a matter of how many years he wants, because he'll be as close to that max number as he would like to be.
Who are the potential free agents for this offseason, and how is the team going to handle that with the need to open up cap space being part of the equation?
So their big free agent this year is a restricted free agent in Evan Bouchard, who I had mentioned before. He has arbitration rights. He's 2 years away from unrestricted free agency. If the Oilers want to try and go along with him, it's going to be expensive. It's probably going to be north of 10, maybe even as much as $11 million per season, which sounds jarring at face value when you think about Adam Fox is only about $9 million, Cale Makar is something like $10 million, Quinn Hughes is in that ballpark as well. But now that the cap's going to keep going up $5 to $10 million every year, it's going to become more palatable a lot quicker. The other free agents include guys towards the bottom of the lineup: Kasperi Kapanen, Connor Brown, Corey Perry, John Klingberg, and Trent Frederick. Trent Frederick, they've been linked to as far as being close to a long-term extension, but that hasn't been agreed to yet. That number and that term is definitely a little concerning, but being that we don't know if the 8x3.5 number that's out there is accurate, I don't want to be unfair, but they have room to tinker around the edges here. They're going to be in what I like to call the bargain bin. They are going to be looking for this year's version of Nate Schmidt, like the Panthers signed last year. They're going to be looking for this year's version of what Connor Brown was 2 years ago, or a Kasperi Kapanen type. I do think Brown and Kapanen, and Perry for that matter, are all probably going to come back because Chris Knobloch really likes them to varying degrees. And as far as Perry, McDavid and Draisaitl really like having him as an option to play with as well. So I think all three of those guys will come in at under $1.5 million, which isn't particularly cost prohibitive. But one of Arvidsson or Evander Kane, maybe even as both, end up getting moved this summer. And that creates space. That's $9 million when you put those two together. And that's a sizable amount of space. Of course, you have to account for Draisaitl's extension kicking in, Bouchard's new contract, and whatever a new McDavid contract is. And I was doing the math earlier on the Locked On Oilers I recorded for Monday, and there's a world where they're paying McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard like $43-44 million for just those three guys as soon as 2 years from now. And then at that point, you're talking about a very different roster, because to pay that much for that few players, it really means the rest of your roster's got to be close to perfect.
Yeah, not a lot of margin for error left after that. Look, the Oilers came so close the last 2 years, but one issue that a lot of people ask about is goaltending. Where do they stand with their goaltenders, and what do you think it looks like when the puck drops in October?
So all year, Stan Bowman was pretty adamant that he didn't feel there was an upgrade out there. And I think some of that is tied to what the cost of a supposed upgrade would have been. We know John Gibson has been linked to half of the teams across the NHL over the last few years, but a goalie whose stats are like 5 to 10% better than the tandem they're paying $3 million for twice the price, that's not particularly enticing. Kara Vejmelka was the goalie that intrigued me the most during the season last year, but Utah extended him long-term. Pretty much, if the Oilers don't want to run back Skinner and Pickard, which wouldn't be great for optics, even though it's probably the best they're going to do, they're going to the lottery ticket pool. They're going to Vitek Vanacek. They're going to Alexander Georgiev, maybe an Alex Lyon, someone who's been in tandems, has shown the ability to be good, but is more or less a depressed asset. I don't think you'll see the Oilers in the trade market for a goalie unless it's a restricted free agent where it's a lot of uncertainty baked into why they're cheap, because by and large, it's hard to get a good goalie. You know, it's very reminiscent of the conversations we have about quarterbacks, where there's not enough good ones to start for every team, let alone enough to have good backups for every team. And I'm not saying Skinner or Pickard inspire a whole lot of confidence, but you at least have the track record of, okay, they won't sink your regular season. They can play well enough to get you in the playoffs. Of course, they need better goaltending. You're not going to win the Stanley Cup with .895 goaltending. Skinner and Pickard, the worst save percentage for a goalie tandem to make the Stanley Cup Final since I think it was like 2001 or something crazy like that. So the Oilers entirely outliers in that respect as far as how they've gone about piecing together a goalie room. Unfortunately, I don't really see a world where they're going to be able to upgrade that position unless it's something really out of left field. If there's a young goalie that wants to change the scenery, or there's something just not on anyone's radar, but otherwise it's probably going to be Pickard and Skinner again.
If only one stays, who's more likely to be the guy?
Probably Skinner, because they've spent a lot of time trying to give him the runway to take this. And as much as you don't want to believe in the sunk cost fallacy, that's not the way sports teams operate. The Oilers are going to look at Skinner and say, we've given him 3 regular seasons. He's won 40 games. He was a down ballot Calder finalist as a rookie when he started on a week's notice, when they realized Jack Campbell was entirely untenable as a starter. And Pickard, he's a journeyman. You know, we talked about it coming into the playoffs. He only had 2 career playoff starts before this year. He had a nice run in the playoffs, but he's a backup. He's a career backup. He's one real season as a starter was like 9 years ago. Had to go to Europe, come back 2 years in the AHL. He's not a bad backup. If you're a good team, you can get by with him, but you don't want to be dependent on either of these guys.
Any other priorities this offseason in Edmonton?
They need to find another top 6 winger to complement McDavid, Draisaitl, and Zach Hyman. And I don't think it'll be Evander Kane, just because they probably feel it can get cheaper, and they're just tired of the penalties. As good a player as he is, he took entirely too many penalties and lost his cool way too often. And last year of a deal, enticing skill set, limited no trade, so he can be traded to, I think it's 16 out of 32 teams. And he's got a skill set that teams on the fence kind of value a lot, where the playing with that edge, the willingness to fight, to mix it up. He's not a depressed asset. they will get something useful for him. So a replacement for Evander Kane is probably my big answer. Unless they think it's Matthew Savoie, or if it's, because I really don't think it's Kapanen. I don't think it's Podkolzin. I don't think it's a full season of 40-year-old Corey Perry. It feels like they're a forward away, and that's before they subtract Kane or Arvidsson or both. They might need 2 top 6 wingers going into next year, which is all the more daunting when you think about the other work they need.
And the salary cap limitations that they have. So, all right, Nick, going to be an interesting offseason. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Be sure to check out Locked On Oilers on all the major podcasting platforms and over on YouTube. You can follow me on social, on Twitter and Instagram, it's Nick Zararis, and then on TikTok, it's Nick Zararis Sports.
Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. That's wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blackhawks, Jack Bushman. And Jack, I got to say, the Blackhawks are at the center of a lot of talk here as we are less than a week away from the draft. They have the 3rd pick overall. And the big question on everybody's minds, do they keep it or do they trade it? What's the latest that you've heard?
Well, Gil, first, just want to say thank you for having me back on the show. Always enjoy getting together to talk Blackhawks hockey. Yeah, that's going to be a fascinating question over these next, 5-6 days leading up to the NHL draft. As that rumors dropped, the Blackhawks could be open to trading back. But as I've kind of talked through on my show, Gil, it sounds like they'd only be interested in doing that for a young player that could come in, fits with the age range of the young group they have on the scene right now. Probably a forward is what they'd be looking at. Since that's kind of their biggest area of need at this point in time. And it's just, I think it's going to be hard to find exactly what they're looking for in order to make it work. So it could happen. I'm not going to put it past GM Kyle Davidson. I just think it's one of those deals that's easier said than done to truly get what they're looking for. But hey, I said that same thing about trading Seth Jones prior to the trade deadline, and they obviously got that deal done and worked well for the Florida Panthers as he helped them win the Stanley Cup this year, of course. So yeah, I mean, I could see it going both ways, just because it is a really interesting position for the Blackhawks at number 3. It's really wide open at that point in the draft, and if they can get another player, maybe trade down a few picks and still come away with a high-end prospect, I think Kyle Davidson would like to do that. We'll see if it actually winds up happening, though, Gil.
So give me an example, of a player that they would kind of be looking at. Obviously, it could be any number of players, but give me an example.
Yeah, I think the name that comes to mind immediately is JJ Purka from the Buffalo Sabres. There's been some rumors on him over the last couple of weeks that he's not really happy with how things have been going with the Buffalo Sabres. He's due for a new contract as an RFA. There have been some rumblings around him potentially getting offer sheeted on July 1st. So could be JJ Purka going to the Blackhawks, as he does fit that young age range and would bring some much needed skill on the wing to the Blackhawks top 6. And they do have the 9th overall selection in this year's draft. So maybe that is a spot where the Blackhawks acquire Purka in number 9, send number 3 to the Buffalo Sabres. However, from what I've heard, it sounds like the Buffalo Sabres want someone who will help them win right here, right now, in replace of JJ Purka. And I just don't know who necessarily fits that role for the Chicago Blackhawks. Maybe, someone like Teuvo Teravainen or Ilya Mikheyev, but those guys have no trade clauses in their contracts. And given it's been 14 years since the Buffalo Sabres have made the playoffs, it's not exactly the most, player-friendly destination in the NHL. I wouldn't be surprised if the Buffalo Sabres are on those guys' no trade lists. And then, you think about anyone else on the Blackhawks who can go and help that team. Alex Vlasic, I don't think the Blackhawks want to be trading him. Like Frankie Nazar, they don't want to trade that guy. Artem Levshinov, Sam Rinzel. So again, that's where I get to, like, it sounds good on paper, the Blackhawks getting JJ Purka, but I just don't know if they have a piece that would make sense for Buffalo to go and get in exchange for JJ Purka. But he's definitely the one to keep an eye on over the next week or so.
How about if they keep the pick? I mean, everybody's saying it's Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa as 1 and 2 or 2 and 1. Who do you think the Blackhawks would take if they keep the pick and go at 3?
Yeah, I'm sure they'd love for Michael Misa to fall into their laps at number 3, but I just don't see a world in which that's happening, even though there has been some kind of rumblings from a few NHL anonymous executives saying they prefer Anton Frondel over Michael Misa. To me, I think that's absolutely crazy. For the Blackhawks at 3, I would like to see them go and select James Haggins. I just think he has the highest ceiling and is the best player available at that point. And when you're that high in the draft, I like selecting best player available. And while Artem Levshinov looks really solid, the Blackhawks had an opportunity last year to select Ivan Demidov, and they obviously let him go by. If James Haggins goes and develops into a really special offensive player in this league, I know he's undersized, and the Blackhawks already have a lot of that in their forward group, but it would just be such a tough pill to swallow to pass on both of those guys in back-to-back years. And I personally just think James Haggins has that really special skill set. And if he was playing in the OHL this year instead of the NCAA or playing in a junior league, he would have put up bananas offensive numbers. And I really believe he would be thought of a little differently going into this year's draft. So I'd like to see them go with James Haggins. Doesn't sound like they're leaning that way though, Gil, again, just because I think they do have a lot of undersized players like Bedard and Frank Nazar already in their top 6. So sounds like they're looking with someone with size and skill combination. So I'd be expecting Anton Frondel, Caleb Denoyer, and Porter Martone to really be the 3 players they're diving through. And if it's not going to be James Haggins, I'd like to see it be Porter Martone, but it's probably going to be any of those 3 guys.
All right, trade pulled off over the last week. Andre Burkovsky coming to town. What does he add, and where do you see him fitting in?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good trade from general manager Kyle Davidson, only giving up Joe Veleno to the Seattle Kraken. And Veleno was someone who was possibly a buyout candidate here for the Blackhawks. Very unlikely he was going to be part of the future. So to go and swap him and bring in Andre Burkovsky, who, yeah, he has kind of struggled the last few years with Seattle, but I do think he, again, checks a box the Blackhawks are needing, size and skill combination. He'll provide that and be plugged into the middle 6. Definitely will be an upgrade from what the Blackhawks had in those spots last year. And Burakovsky's big, he's got some good size at 6'3", a decent skater, decent goal scorer. The contract isn't very good, $5.5 million per year for the next 2 seasons. But with where the Blackhawks are at right now and all the room they have financially, like that's nothing to them. So thought this was a good buy low spot on Andre Burakovsky. Really didn't cost them anything substantial to go and get him. And, is, again, definitely an upgrade inside the Blackhawks middle 6 on the wing.
You mentioned all that cap space that they have. What is the strategy this offseason? How do you think they use it?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, Gil, because they do have so much room, and there's obviously some notable free agents out there. A guy like Mitch Marner, Nikolai Ehlers, Brock Besser, Sam Bennett potentially leaving Florida. That's going to be a really interesting situation to watch. So they have the money to go and bring in some good help, give Connor Bedard more aid in his development, but I don't think they're necessarily going to be going after the big guns. And I think that's going to be pretty disappointing to a lot of Blackhawks fans out there. I know some of them wanted to go and pursue Mitch Marner. It doesn't really sound like the Blackhawks are expected to be too serious in those discussions. I do think, though, they need to add someone to that top line, whether it's Brock Besser. I would love to go and see Brock Besser added to this forward group because they just need one more piece. I think it would be a big failure of the offseason for, Ryan Donato and Andre Burakovsky, like Donato coming back, bringing in Burakovsky. Yeah, those are nice little moves to help this forward group be better, but it's not a true top line add. And the Blackhawks have just been missing that for so long. So I would really like to go and see them make a run at someone like Brock Besser, who can bring in some speed and more skill, help Connor Bedard and Frank Nazar, help their development go as swimmingly as possible. And I really do think it would be a smart move for Kyle Davidson to bring in someone like Brock Besser this summer.
How about the blue line? What is that looking like? And are they looking for help there as well?
Honestly, the blue line is pretty set in store for next season just because they have so many young pieces. The name of the game next year and the name of the game for the Blackhawks rebuild right now is still patience. And Artem Levshinov, Sam Rinzel, Kevin Korchinski, Alex Vlasic, Wyatt Kite, these are all guys who are 24, 23 or younger. And the Blackhawks want those guys to be getting the lion's share of the opportunities out there. The only real veteran that's expected to be on the blue line next season is Connor Murphy, and he's entering the final year of his current deal and has even been part of, minor trade discussions just because, again, the name of the game is patience in the future for the Blackhawks. So it's going to be about giving the kids all the opportunities in the world next year. So blue line's kind of set in store.
Well, going to be an interesting couple of weeks now in Chicago. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Jack, can you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also check me out on YouTube. And if you want to follow me on socials, you can find me everywhere at Jack Bushman too.
Jack, thanks so much.
Absolutely, Gil. Thanks for having me on. Always enjoy it.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Again, that first $5 bet, if it wins, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Mammoth, Robin Liano. I got to get used to Mammoth. I'm still working on that a little bit. But Robin, an exciting time for this team. First of all, first draft with the new nickname. And second of all, a lot of questions out there, a lot of rumors about what the Mammoth may do with their first overall pick. What are you hearing and what do you expect to happen?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of it started off when a fellow co-host of mine, Tom Callahan, asked in an interview in the press conference with Bill Armstrong when Utah moved up from 14 to fourth overall, is the fourth overall pick in play? Are you willing to trade it? Try to see what he's doing. Bill Armstrong was open about it. He said, yeah, we're open to trading it. It's definitely in play. It's like my scouts don't like to hear that because, they're always like, hey, we're working day in, day out and seeing if we can find the best player for you. And you're just going to trade that pick away. But I think a little bit has been misinformation has been kind of like miscued or whatever on saying that they will trade it. I don't think that we don't know that yet. I mean, and again, Bill Armstrong likes to keep his cards close, but from what I do know is it still is in play. He is listening to offers and he's he's seeing, all right, what can we get? What are some things that are be coming our way? And again, if it's something that's really worth it to him, yeah, he will easily take that deal.
What do you think he would be looking for in a trade if one was to happen?
Yeah, I think this has been talked about multiple times, and we've kind of decided that I think the minimum that he would even be asking for, and this is the bare minimum, is at least a top six forward, someone who can easily come in and be an impact player for the Utah Mammoth right out the gate going into next season. And no dancing around like, oh, this player has the potential to be in a top six forward, but their injuries were like, no, someone who is a proven top six forward every single day. And it's a big ask. It is a huge ask, not to mention there might be some other stipulations, maybe to kind of even out some other deals. Maybe Utah might part with some, maybe a fan favorite, or just to kind of, see what even out. Because we never see a 1-for-1. It's not like we're going to see Bill Armstrong get rid of 4th overall for a number 1 seed. It's just not going to happen that way. But there's going to be some movement between.
If Utah keeps the 4th pick, who are the players that you think they're most likely to be looking at?
Yeah, so there are a couple of name options that have come across based off of mock drafts and just based off general conversations I've had with other draft experts. And it seems to be that there are this very small group of players that Utah is mainly looking at, where Porter Martone is one of them, again, someone who fits Bill Armstrong's MO, as well as Desnoyers. Desnoyers has been also very high on that list with Bill Armstrong. Thinking in my head as well, some other ones. Anton Frondell is on some people's list. I don't think he'll likely get picked by Utah, but he's on some people's list there. As well as James Haggins, who I think is the one that's most talked about in this when it comes to the Utah Mammoth at 4th overall.
And what do you think the biggest need? You mentioned top 6 forward, but most first-round picks don't play right away. So what is the biggest organizational need for the Mammoth at this point?
At this point, I think that it will come down to whatever best player available is, who they can see who can have not to say the quickest turnaround, but is closest to the most NHL ready, because they want somebody who can make an impact as soon as possible. Because this Mammoth team wants to be competitive. They want to, next year they want to go to the playoffs. They want to start making a fight for the Stanley Cup within the next couple of years.
And what is the biggest missing ingredient for this coming season to get them to that last step? Because this team made a lot of progress last year, but what does it take to make that next step and be a playoff team?
Yeah, I think to me the biggest one is having a veteran, like 1 or 2 C. And I've said this multiple times, like on other Locked On shows, on the Locked On Mammoth podcast. It's nothing against Logan Cooley. I love Logan Cooley, and I think he will be an amazing number 1 C for the Utah Mammoth in a couple of years. And honestly, I think he still could be a very amazing number 1 C right now, but he's still young, makes a lot of mistakes. The rest of the team, also very young, they've made so many mistakes. There's a reason why they took a pretty hard fall and had some really bad inconsistencies. They need a number 1, a veteran 1 or 2 C to kind of come in, to kind of bring in a little bit of mold, to kind of bring that pace back together, to get the understanding of where this team should be, and that is fighting for a spot in the Stanley Cup playoffs next season.
How much cap space does this team have as of right now, and are there any free agents or trade candidates out there that you think could fit that bill?
Yeah, so this has also been talked about a number of times. So right now, Utah is looking at $20 million in free cap space right now. So that's a lot. They still have to re-sign a couple of players, and that might take up maybe a couple of million, because these guys are restricted free agents, maybe ones that might not command a whole lot of money going into this next season, which allows Bill Armstrong to really go for a big splash should he want to. It's really hard to kind of gauge exactly the player he's looking for, but what has been talked about multiple times, and not a lot of people like this as an idea, but it's been talked about as the idea of first and foremost of Utah going for a offer sheet of a guy like JJ Purka, which I think everyone has said would fit into Utah's kind of mold pretty well, honestly. Yeah, it would probably really take off a lot of Buffalo fans, because offer sheets, people hate them for some reason, even despite the fact that it's in the CBA. That's one, but two, there are rumors swirling around that Utah is within the mix of bringing in a player like a Brad Marchand, bringing in someone like him, maybe even him specifically. And I think that's the most important aspect. Tom and I have talked about this in the Locked On Mammoth podcast and saying that they might be looking for a pest kind of player. Some people have asked, hey, what about Liam O'Brien? Isn't he a pest? No, he's an agitator. He's one that just really, he gets in your face, but he doesn't really have the top end skill to kind of make up for it. Pest players are the ones that just they're annoying. You just hate them, but you love when they're on their team. All that kinds of aspects.
Yep.
But Utah has been pretty up on that list when it comes to a player like Brad Marchand.
The offer sheet situation would cost a lot of draft picks if you sign Purka. Do they have the ammunition to do that?
They really do. They have Utah has an incredible amount of draft capital that they can afford it all the way up to like the most expensive the next 6 or whatever it is first round draft picks if they wanted to. They have it all, right? I think the biggest thing is, and I've talked about this, is one is I don't think you'll go that high. But 2 is Bill Armstrong really has to ask himself that is it worth it? Is it worth going for a player like that? It's like just because we can doesn't mean we should kind of thing is what I said on the Locked On Mammoth podcast. Ryan Smith, the owner of the Utah Mammoth, has said pretty much, indirectly, Bill Armstrong is the one that said that Ryan Smith told him that, hey, the pocketbook's open, you can spend money. We have yet to see that. Maybe this might be the first offseason we do see that.
Going to be an interesting couple of weeks. Robin, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Yeah, you can find the podcast just about everywhere on social media. We are at Locked On Mammoth. That's at Locked On Mammoth. I'm personally at Robin_Leonio on Twitter or X, whatever you do want to call it. I co-host Tom Callahan. He's also on X. He's on at Callahan on air, but he's mostly over on Blue Sky. You can find him over at Tom Talks.
All right, Robin, thank you so much.
Of course.
I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers, Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks, and Robin Leonio of Locked On Mammoth for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we're here every day, Monday through Saturday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the hockey world. And we have a big week ahead with the NHL Draft and free agency right behind it. So make sure you keep it locked in to Locked On NHL for the best analysis out there. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.